Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. I was speaking at a conference this past weekend, and several wondered if I really am so conservative that I can't turn left even when I'm driving. They decided that, yes, it's true, which means this is not a safe place for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged. This is broadcast number 108. And this week we have our friend Bob Pardon, founder and director of the New England Institute of Religious Research and Meadow Haven, about recovering from spiritual abuse. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie.
Yeah, I know I'm a senior researcher because I am qualified to belong to ARP now.
That's right. You're really old. That's
I'm
right.
Very, very senior. Yes. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer ahead of us. So our sponsors for today's program include World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet, and the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. And if you want to keep this program going because you like it or because it annoys you and you'd like to inflict it upon others, please go to midwestoutreach.org, find that yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. Keep us going here on the Unknown Webcast. And now my mouse is giving me trouble. How do I get it over to the stop button? That's how you do it. Oh, okay. Every once in a while, do you ever have that happen where your little cursor makes you want to curse? No, I'm just kidding. Don, are you talking to me? Because I don't hear a word you're saying.
I am talking to you. You're just not listening well.
He's mystified.
Must be.
He's missed it. So he can move his cursor in cursive and then curse. So
you're talking to me. So
let's go, Bob. We just invite you on so someone can watch us do our shtick. That's really what it's all about.
We invent our shtick as we go along.
Kind of a dog and pony show.
Yes, but who's the dog and who's the pony?
Okay, I wasn't going to say that.
All right, Bob Pardon, tell us a little bit about Meadow Haven, if you will.
Well, Meadow Haven is an offshoot of the New England Institute of Religious Research, which tends to be more apologetic. Meadow Haven is the only long-term facility in the world for people that come out of destructive groups, what are known as cults. In one-on-one situations, might be big, might be small. And it's a place where people could come and spend a whole year and put their life back together again. So we generally got individuals who had the worst experiences in some destructive group. Not everyone that comes out of a cult needs to place like Meadow Haven, but some do. So we would deal with individuals who have been sexually, physically, spiritually abused, who've been hospitalized, perhaps suicidal, on psychiatric meds, things of that sort. And we've seen the Lord really use it tremendously to help many individuals. So it's been a real privilege to operate in that context.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things that, for example, Midwest Christian Outreach, we can do just by talking with people, understanding what it is that they've been through, helping them to understand how their worldview has changed. And those who can kind of start moving back and looking at the Bible, for example, we can deal with that. Not everyone can, as you know.
Right.
Some of them are just so, traumatized even by the Bible that it's almost like putting garlic in front of a vampire or something.
Right.
To them. So now you also are co-sponsoring a conference coming up in October-ish. How do you like that?
October 26th and 27th.
Which is looking kind of like this. Oh, it's blinking. Why is it blinking? That's kind of weird. I don't know.
It's going to be a disco conference.
A disco conference. I think I'll stop presenting that one right now.
I'm getting a little strobe effect there. I think I'm.
Yeah, I do not know why it's not doing that on my. Go away. How can I stop sharing? Stop.
There we go.
Already. There we go. Now it's gone. Well, I won't do that again. You'll have to give out the website for that. But recovering from spiritual abuse. And that is in October what? October 26th and 27th?
27th, the Friday and Saturday.
in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, CT.
Yeah, right at the Bradley International Airport at a DoubleTree Hotel. And it's a 2-day conference, and we've got speakers coming in from around the United States. There'll be people coming from other countries even to participate in this. And it's for those who are struggling to understand what happened to them in some kind of abusive biblical situation. Sometimes what we'd call full-blown cults, sometimes aberrational Christian groups that preach the gospel but grind their membership up in the process. So it'll be a great conference, and we've got a lot of different presenters and workshops, from family to helping a loved one, to reaching out to others, to understanding what the Bible is really all about, legalism, just a number of different ways to approach it.
Well, good. Okay, so now you and I kind of go back a long time, not as long as Ron and I go back, but you are part of Evangelical Ministries to New Religions,
Yes.
as Midwest Christian Outreach is.
And I hope a paid-up member.
I don't know about that. That's up to the executive director, Eric Clement. I'm just a pretty face for the organization, which shows you how deeply they have had to reach into the bottom of the barrel for that position. But we've talked a lot about the 12 tribes. In fact, we did an article on the 12 tribes for the PFO Journal some years back, Island Pond. And you might want to just explain a little bit about who the 12 tribes are, because you sort of are the specialist on that group.
Right, yeah. I mean, we've had to deal with them probably more than any other group. And sometimes it has become rather tedious. But it's a group that started back in the 70s by an individual named Albert Eugene Spriggs. They call him Yonak, who believed that he had a call from God. He is an apostle, and he started this group that is communal. And it started down in Tennessee, and it has now gone worldwide. He himself is in very poor health, and I've heard he even has some elements of dementia.
He's about in his 80s now, isn't he?
No, I think he's in his late 70s. I don't think he's quite 80 yet. He was born in 1936.
Oh, that would make you 82 this year.
Okay, then 82 then. Yeah, my math, your math is better than mine. 82.
Okay.
And it's a group that started out preaching the gospel. They used to meet at a Presbyterian church down in Tennessee, run by a pastor named Ben Hayden. It's back in the 70s.
Oh, I remember Ben Hayden.
Yeah, very famous down south. And anyway, they broke away because he wasn't doing it right, and they were going to do it right. And they became essentially like an Old Testament copy of Christianity, where there's a lot of legalism. He gets revelation from God. His teachings are on par with the scriptures, and they own you. You join this group, and it has immense control over your life. So it's very dangerous. We've had a lot of people come to Meadow Haven out of that group, first and second generation.
Now, where are they? Is it because they're close to you, or that your name is known among the ex-members and you get referrals that way? Why do you think you get so many from them?
Probably because we've just been the ones who have been involved with them the longest. And I think a lot of it's word of mouth. We've done some programs for major networks on the 12 tribes in the past. And I think some of that has brought about some.
They're down in Chattanooga, right?
Yeah, they started down there, but they're all over the place.
Okay.
Their headquarters is really wherever Spriggs, wherever the leader is at. So I mean, they're all over the United States. They're in Europe. They are in Japan. They're in South America. They're in Canada. They used to be in Africa. I don't know whether they still are or not, but they're on just about every continent. They're down in Australia.
Looks like they've attracted the attention of law enforcement in some countries too.
Yes, because of either child labor or child abuse. Usually child abuse. They take a verse in Proverbs, spare the rod and spoil the child, essentially, and they will beat a child. They have to beat the child into submission. So, and that's been done even to the point of shedding blood. And so there's been a lot of child abuse that's gone on, and that's gotten them in trouble up in Vermont. Down in Argentina, there was a huge raid that the police did a number of years ago down there. In Europe, they don't use medical facilities if they don't have to. They try and keep it in-house, and so children have died there because of lack of medical care. So it's just been a matter of a lot.
Looks like they have one really close to me here in Fort Myers, right across the river.
You know, some years ago, Ron had started a section which we don't have on our website anymore, but we may rethink that: the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, I
kind
remember
of deal. Yeah, it really was because he had realized that most of the really destructive groups are small. They're under 1,000 members usually.
Yes.
Now, you know, when we think of Christian cults, we would think of, say, Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, groups like that, which are large. You're talking about millions, and obviously there's serious issues with them. Not all are as detrimental to your physical well-being as others, but they are controlling. This is where spiritual abuse comes in.
Yes.
The small groups, though, to me, may be even worse. You have 12 tribes you mentioned. We've talked about. Gwen Shamblin's Way Down Workshop / Remnant Fellowship is another one that we exposed in 2000, and just has devastated many families. There's a new group springing up. I don't know if you're aware of this one. Christ in Me International, about 300-400 people in Johannesburg, South Africa area.
No, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, they're just wreaking havoc over there, and the leader has basically they teach that we all become Christs as we kind of associate with this group, get baptized, we become anointed, and he is now the king, and he has progressive revelation. So yes, the Bible is important, but he has progressive revelation that supersedes that, sort of like Sprague.
Right.
So I think one of the questions that I sort of want to deal with first is the question of mind control, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, misdefinition, in my opinion, on that. So I'm going to tell you what my response is, and I'll let you two guys go off with that.
Sure.
And that is not that someone has taken over your mind in the sense of, what was a Denzel Washington film?
Manchurian Candidate.
The Manchurian Candidate, right. To where you're programmed and have no ability to make other decisions, but rather that your world view is changed. And so you still have the ability to make decisions, but you make decisions based on what the leader has told you is true, even if it's detrimental to yourself. Because to disobey what the leader said could potentially bring the wrath of God upon you, and that's not something you really want. So you might separate from family because the leader said so, not so much because he said so, but because you have this belief invested in him that he's speaking for God in a way that nobody else does. And so you make the decision to obey him rather than suffer the result of disobeying him. Would that be something similar to your view?
Yeah, I think that we generally don't use the term mind control simply because it makes it sound like you have no ability to control your mind. It's being controlled by somebody else. And to a certain extent, that's the case, but we prefer to call it thought reform, where your worldview, as you put it, or your underlying assumptions and principles, your ideology is subtly transformed into something that you didn't initially hold to. So, and it's a process that you cooperate with. So we frequently at times, Don, we make a distinction, and not everyone does it like this, but you've got what is called brainwashing. And a lot of time, as you know, people are accused, being in cults, of brainwashing they're brainwashed or somebody's brainwashing them. And that's usually not the case. Brainwashing, from our perspective, deals with some kind of coercive physical abuse that pretty much forces you into this alien ideology in order to survive. So it was first coined, I believe, back with the Red Chinese in the Korean War, where they would take
Lifton's book, Thought Reform and the
Psychology of Totalism.
Yeah,
so that they would take American prisoners of war and in a matter of just a month or two, turn them into card-carrying communists. Now, they had been physically abused, they were tortured, they were starved, preached at regularly, and these men, in order to survive, would do that. But once they got out of that environment, brainwashing tends to drop away, because you know that I was forced to accept something that I didn't want to believe in. But then there is thought reform, or mind control, which is where you join a group and you accept the assumptions of the group, that we are God's people, the only ones generally. The leader has a direct pipeline to God, no real accountability. And if you accept the assumption that he knows better than you, then you begin to lose checks and balances, and you cooperate with the process. And so it's much more insidious to get out of a thought reform environment than brainwashing, primarily because the person has to struggle a lot with guilt and shame. Why did I stay in there? I heard these things, I saw these things, it didn't make sense at the time, and I don't know why I stayed, and they really, really struggle a lot in that.
Well, I can answer for myself why I stayed. Is because I kept coming back to my original reason for joining, and that was I had prayed for God to put somebody in my life who could give me, the way I put it was show me the ropes. I wasn't, getting it. I wasn't, when it came to the Christian life, when it came to pursuit of my goals of working for the Lord in the church and all and nothing was working for me. And, I needed somebody who could be a mentor to me. Really, that's what I was looking for. Yeah. And right as I'm praying, here comes this guy into my life, and he seems to match all the criteria. And, I often think of the story of how the children of Israel, the Israelites got Saul before they got David, Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get, and also, I also have heard many people since I've left this group remind me of something I don't know if I heard it so much before I joined, but afterwards I've heard it a lot is, when you get into adulthood, you have to remember, especially in adulthood, in a multitude of counselors, there's safety.
Right.
If you just have one mentor, that could be a problem,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember hearing Geisler say a number of years ago that if you have somebody that claims to have a direct pipeline to God and no actual accountability, if you don't have a cult now, you will have one tomorrow.
And that's what we had. Yeah.
And the problem, I think, Ron, is that in many instances, these groups maintain enough orthodoxy that it ties into something that you either already embrace and
Mm-hmm.
you can make the connections on your own, or it's something that is new to you. You've never, you come to Christ in the group, and so you continue in that because it's been your home. So it's not like they're preaching that you need to worship fire hydrants or something like this, and you're going, I'm out of here, that thing's crazy. So it ministers to you, and it offers you, generally, at least these aberrational Christian groups, a better service to Christ. They have a much more powerful, from their perspective, ability to be able to evangelize. They are God's real stormtroopers. There's all of this kind of understanding.
Elitism,
Yeah, exactly. There's a real elitism.
And, one of the things that I think everyone who leaves one of these groups eventually has to come to grips with for himself or herself was, why did I join?
Yes.
What was it about me? What was it in me that found whatever was in them attractive, and what part of them was attractive? Sometimes I think the way counselors and others try to help people who come out is they might spring that question on the person a little bit too early.
Exactly.
And you really need to get to know the person, because not everybody has the same reason for joining.
Right.
I've seen some pretty bad examples of counseling ex-members and saying, you need to look at yourself first. Well, you'll get to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe because it may not be them at all. It may be that simply they were deceived, and that's.
Well, I think it's important. I think it is important that you realize there was something in me, because I don't want it to happen again. I don't want to be fooled again. What was it? What did I get attracted to that was wrong? If there, I can conceive that I might have been just totally lied to, totally manipulated. But there's usually some kind of bait in the hook that, like you said earlier, Bob, it reminds you, there's something familiar. Harold Bussell's book, Unholy Devotion,
Yes,
talks about the familiar things in the evangelical world. And they all are areas where we all know the evangelical world is never going to do enough, never going to be able to reach its own, goals, levels of hopeful perfection someday.
Right.
But this group comes along and says, like you said earlier about that group, the 12 tribes, we're going to do it right.
yes,
We're going to be the ones that come along and do this right. Everybody else is just, playing around. We're going to do it right. And at some point, I think most of us who get sucked into these, we believed that part of that germ of the idea. But what was it that you wanted done right?
Well, I think there's two things in terms of an individual being recruited, Ron. One, as Michael Langoni will often say in the International Occultic Studies Association, never discount bad luck. You just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people, and you end up getting sucked in. Had it been some other group that you had gotten involved in that was healthier, you're good to go. The other thing is that there's a difference between responsibility and accountability. If that chair that you're sitting on, if that was our chair, and you came in and you sat down on that chair and it collapsed underneath you, and I walked in the room and I said, okay, who broke this chair? Well, it wasn't Don Vino and it wasn't Bob Pardon, it was Ron Hensel, because you sat on it. I didn't. So you were, in a sense, responsible. But as far as accountability goes, that's not the same as responsibility. If you knew that that chair was weak, that it was very unstable, and you ran into the room, jumped up, and then leapt on top of it and busted it, then you're not only responsible, but you're accountable, because you did it with some kind of forethought and knowledge of what you were getting involved in. So former members of destructive groups struggle tremendously in that area, and it's a subtle distinction, but a very important one, because we confuse responsibility with accountability. It's not always the same. This is like three-card Monte down on Broadway, where you're trying to find the P and the guy is manipulating it all over the place. Now, it's not that you are deluded in one sense, or there's something wrong with you. It's just that you happen to be at the wrong place. So I think, too, we don't, in the Meadow Haven program, we'd never started with who's responsible in the midst of all of this. We would first work upon helping the individual come to a better understanding of who they are and seek to build up their sense of self-esteem before the Lord, because that gets trashed in these destructive groups. It was only as we got further on the end that then you start talking about, okay, let's look at this a little bit more closely, and let's talk about responsibility and accountability, because you do have some responsibility. I didn't join the group. The person next to me didn't join the group. You did. But we need to understand the difference between doing that with forethought and knowing that it was going to wreck your life, and doing it out of all the right intentions.
And you mentioned earlier about, like, suddenly, you used the word suddenly, in terms of referring to the conversion, getting converted to the group,
Right.
And I just wanted to say that, yeah, it looks that way from your family's perspective. It looks that way from friends' perspective, especially since many of these groups will have you cut off ties, and they're blindsided. They didn't see it coming.
Right.
But really, it was gradual. It was, if nobody joins a group saying, come join this group, and you won't be talking to your family for years, maybe decades. That's
nobody wakes up one day and says, I got nothing better to do with my life. I think I'll join a destructive group and ruin it.
Yeah,
right. And sometimes it's a step-by-step deception that you're unaware. You should know if you're raised in a church. Let's put it that way. And your church should be teaching, and many of them we know don't, the essentials of the faith on a regular basis. But you still have a responsibility to know that. I mean, it's kind of like driving a car. You may not know what the speed limit is, but that's your responsibility to know.
Right.
So you can't tell the officer when he stops you, gosh, I didn't know it was 35. He's going to go, too bad. Now, it's sort of that way here. So you get into a group, let's say let's take Bill Gothard, not a cult, but sort of cultic
Very cultic, yeah, definitely.
in behavior, who gives you a definition of grace that says grace is God giving you the power and ability to do his will joyfully. And you should know that the definition of grace is unmerited favor.
Mm-hmm.
And you may even kind of think that's what he's saying, but he's not. So you haven't either listened to what he said, or you just sort of allowed it. I talk about gaining belief by osmosis. It's just sort of absorb it in. And so by and by, you become convinced of the teachings he's giving you and separate them from other churches that are not teaching in exactly the same way. But it was a gradual process. It didn't just come up one day and say.
Corresponding to that gradual process and the osmosis word, I think what we're really referring to is the social context of group dynamics, of getting into these groups. And really, I think we underplay the social context of the church in terms of how we come to the faith, how we get discipled, how important that is. That's what God intended, that we would come to the faith and be nurtured in the faith in the context of fellowship with other people. But in the osmosis factor in these destructive groups is, I come and I sit and I watch this person over here has cut off ties with their family.
Right.
That's really unusual. And then, but wait a minute, a few weeks later, this person over there in my group has cut off ties with her family. And what I'm finding is that, wow, there's this deep problem that the church is not addressing, but we're addressing it here in this group. And, it's just so pervasive and it's so overlooked. And a lot of people don't realize that, they might need to do this. And I'm finding, wow, everybody here is having this same problem except me. Now I'm the weird one in the group. Exactly. So I scheduled this meeting with my leader. This actually happened. And I was confused. And frankly, the whole issue of separation from my family was just one of many. It wasn't really the reason I asked to meet with him. And he didn't like to meet one-on-one. He didn't like to do that because he was better at manipulating groups than he was better than at manipulating individuals. And in some ways, it's easier to manipulate a group than an individual. Especially if you're a strong personality. People don't want to risk standing up and looking like a fool in front of the group. So he knows how to use that group pressure. So I met with him. I finally got him to agree to meet with me. And he went to his little blackboard or dry erase board. I forget which one it was. And on one side of it, he wrote the word hell. And on the other side, he wrote the word heaven. And then he looked at me and he drew a line saying, this is the way the Christian life normally goes, from hell to heaven. He drew the arrow. Mm-hmm. And then he said, but lately you've been looking like this. And then he does a U-turn and has me going back toward hell. And I'm thinking, what? I didn't even know what to say. I'm just listening. And then finally he looks at me and says, you have not said one negative thing about your family.
Oh, wow.
It's like, whoa, I'm going to hell. But I think he knew you see, these leaders, they take risks. He's taking a risk. Maybe that'd be the last time he'd ever see me. But he understands conditioning, and he understands that he's been putting me through these paces all along. And he was taking a gamble that now I'm ready to hear this, that I had better toe the line with the other people.
And if you were becoming a potential liability, if you were becoming high maintenance in one sense, it's better to get you out. And so he just draws this extreme line.
Right. I saw that over and over and over again. He would be patient with somebody to a certain point, and then he'd he'd force a decision.
Right.
Force a decision. And what that happens, once you've made a series of these decisions, and they always are put to you in crisis moments. I mean, they start to kind of be self-reinforcing.
Yes.
And you've made decision after decision after decision. It's harder to undo these decisions.
Yes. Yeah, that's Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, where he's talking about being able to increase the sense of responsibility that an individual has, because they make these small steps. They commit a little bit, they commit a little bit, they commit a little bit, and pretty soon they have had a huge commitment. It's very difficult to go backwards then on that. If
Right.
you have cut ties with your family, you've given the things that you own to the group, you've left your job, it takes a massive amount for an individual to say, I was wrong on this, and to just back out. It's better to continue and up the ante.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we're going to take just a quick little break here. Ron, you have a word from somebody?
Yeah, we have a word from World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious
And they were just
doctrines.
calling, I think, too.
Yeah, wasn't that them on the line? I think so. Other ideas whose time has gone, and they have a special announcement. Your spiritual rights are under attack. People who oppose your teaching are criticizing you by name in public. Are you looking for that one verse in scripture that says, if you don't like them, kill them? Well, we have something even better. It's the Benny Hinn Holy Ghost machine gun. Yes, because you don't have to take it anymore. It's fully automatic, so there's no waiting for results. It has a high capacity magazine to wipe out every detractor, and it's high caliber. You can blow their heads off. Yes, the Benny Hinn, Holy Ghost machine gun, available at World's End Theology Outlet. And you should get more than one, I think, because you never know. People are
That's
coming
right.
at you from all
never know.
sides.
Yeah, that's right.
People are
You
daring to contradict
two-handed. That's right.
teachings that you have
Well,
from
that sounds
God.
effective.
Well, I don't know if it worked for Benny. I know he wanted one really
All right.
badly.
He looked all through the
Himself.
Bible looking for, the one
Yeah.
verse that said, blow their heads off, and couldn't find
Yeah.
it.
So
Okay, so you're committed now. I want to just kind of shift gears just a moment here, because there are those who maybe have left the group, or their group has lost credibility in society, and they sort of re-entrench because they're so invested. A book was written in the 1950s, When Prophecies Fail, which was actually about a UFO cult. Why is it that people do that? What's the dynamic of, being in a small group that had prophetic utterance that utterly failed, but somehow they become more committed to it? Why is that?
Well, I think that, there may be a couple of factors. One is that the individual in this context doubles down. They have already committed a tremendous amount, and it's difficult to say they were wrong. So like the Jehovah's Witnesses and a number of these kind of apocalyptic groups that give you dates, they rewrite the dates. Well, we just kind of misinterpreted this a little bit here, or we misinterpreted that. Plus, when there's a lot of opposition that comes as a result of this, this only proves that we are God's group. Because what do the scriptures say? That you're going to be persecuted, that you're going to have those, your enemies in your own family. So it creates this kind of double bind, so to speak, that the individual is in. That's why we've always thought, when individuals come to our support groups, and they've come out of groups like this, Don, they generally feel like they are failures, they're second-class Christians, God's not going to love them as much as he loves others. They put it in a number of different ways. But we always tell them, you are the strong ones. It's the weak individuals who continue to stay in these groups, because you, in your own mind, this is a Bible-based group, were thinking, I'd rather go to hell at some future time than to continue to live in hell. And so I'm getting out of here. So that takes a tremendous amount of courage and strength to leave that environment, because the implications are not just, you've left the Kiwanis, or you've left some sorority or fraternity that you belong to.
Right.
You've left God.
Well, I'd like to give a slightly different slant on that. There are a lot of people, I think you're right, that is a good description of how they came to that decision to leave. In my case, I literally thought I was going to die.
Yes.
I mean, I had lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. I couldn't eat. I was sitting in my air-conditioned office at work, and sweat was pouring down my back, no matter how much I lowered the thermostat. all I could think of is I'm going to hell. And I kept thinking that for months after I left the group. It was like, if I die now, I'm pretty sure I'm going to hell. So I don't want to die now. So, but I think I'm going to die if I stay in this group. So I better get out of this group. Now that happened to me in June of '92. I was really trying to leave just to get my composure back.
Sure.
Just to avoid going to the hospital or something worse. And then after 6 weeks, I think it was roughly 6 weeks, I didn't have any place to go. So I went back. And this time I thought, okay, I'll just try to keep a handle on things. This time I didn't have the same kind of breakdown, but I eventually decided I can't stay here. I just can't stay here.
Right.
And
that's where the tremendous amount of courage on your part is critical. And I think that God uses at times things like your physiology breaking down or your mental stability beginning to break down, that God uses that to get individuals out of these groups.
Yeah, it's, but I struggled with the assurance of salvation for years after I left. Were you at New Orleans? I forget when I told.
Yes.
Yeah, so you heard the Billy Graham story.
Right.
I asked for a sign from God. I got an elevator ride with Billy Graham. Okay, but that wasn't good enough. It was like, it didn't help. So, it's just, you're and you do feel stupid, at least I did, because I've been to Bible college, and I had been taught better than this. So a lot of my confusion was that how could I be so easily fooled? Well, I know it took a couple of years before I was really, about 18 months or so, I am to think about. It was not overnight, that's for sure, before I was really fully sucked in. But you feel really stupid when you were taught better than that.
Well, Ron, Paul Martin. You know who Paul Martin was, who founder of Wellspring, since gone to be with the Lord.
I talked to Larry Kyle a lot. I don't know if I ever talked to Paul Martin, but yeah.
All right. Yeah, Paul was a good friend, but Paul one time did this study, which we have expanded on, and I heard him just reference it, but he went through the scriptures and pulled out every verse he could find from Genesis to Revelation that dealt with false prophet, false Messiah, bad shepherd, bad teaching, anything that was even mildly associated with any of these categories, and began to see a pattern that arose. That by and large, he said about 90% of the verses did not deal with theology. Only about 10% of the verses that he could find dealt with a statement that the false prophet is going to do X, Y, Z in terms of he's going to teach you about false gods. He's going to get you to do something that is not consistent with the scriptures. He said most of the verses, 90%, dealt with how you were being treated, how the flock was being treated by a false prophet. And when you think about it, this makes a lot of sense, because your average parishioner or individual that goes to seminary or goes to college, because we've worked with individuals from seminaries that have MDiv degrees that get caught up in a cult, whereby you get only teaching along the lines of theology. So if you're taught that in the group that God lives on another planet, like a Mormonism, or that it's a Unitarian type of belief and they deny the deity of Christ, that the individual, that's what a cult is, when by and large it's being treated badly. And most of your parishioners, they are not theologians. They can't always make these distinctions, but they do know when they're not being treated well, or when their neighbor is not being treated well, they're not being loved. And so they begin to put two and two together here and say, wait a minute, I know the Bible teaches what the prophet is saying, but it also teaches this about loving and being kind and accepting and the importance of family. And we're just writing this all off. So that's what I think gets a lot of people out, is that there's a disconnect between the theology and the behavior that they are experiencing. something is wrong there.
Yeah, what happens is I can tell you that you notice it from the beginning, that usually these cult leaders, there's something off, or these spiritual abusers, if they're not, if you don't, if it's an evangelical group, there's always something that doesn't quite, like, for instance, one of the requirements of being an elder in a church is that you're gentle, peaceable, prudent, not pugnacious, it says, which of course is, has to do more with brawling, fisticuffs. But at the same time, we had a leader who flew off the handle, went into ranting rages.
Yeah.
Was anything but gentle.
Right.
And you'd see these things, but how did you deal with them? Well, a whole group of people sat there and just let it happen. Now, I do know that this kind of thing also happens in regular local churches.
Sure
it's not. So this is something that,
absolutely,
in a group, nobody really knows how to deal with that. I think what happens differently in one of these abusive groups as opposed to a church, which can become an abusive group, but let's just talk about regular churches that don't, is that there's somebody in the group that's going to reinforce what just happened, is going to be an apologist for it. In our case, I watched this woman get chewed out up one side, down the other by the leader. And I was kind of wondering, really, what's this all about? And then one of the women in the group, who's kind of like one of his lieutenants, one of his right-hand people, she waits for a while, and then she pipes up and she said, and basically said, he was right to talk to you that way.
Yeah.
That was the Holy Spirit trying to talk to you. That was God. He was totally in line with the scriptures when he did that. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I don't know everything here. I don't know what's going on. I do know that I've come to trust this leader, but how do I explain this? Well, here comes another person in the group who I've kind of learned to trust.
Right.
And she's okay. So there must be something I don't know. I just
exactly.
And so you now it's suddenly acceptable, or gradually acceptable, to be abused, verbally abused in the group.
Yes.
Okay. I want to set this up for something, because we're going to be running out of time here fairly quick. People get into groups for a variety of reasons. You have some who are in fairly solid evangelical churches who get into groups because the church sort of introduced them to the group without realizing what was going on. Right. Bill Gothard is that way. He was in, he had 2.5 million people go through his seminars recommended by churches. Gwen Shamblin was in over 30,000 churches across 60 denominations, had 100 million Christians go through her programs sponsored by churches. So there's this idea somehow that they must be okay because they're in my church. So you have that sort of introduction. Then you have an introduction, say, like the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, as they come to your door and they start talking about, well, Jesus never claimed to be God, and the Trinity isn't true, and you find that you have no defense for that because you really weren't taught well in your church, or you didn't listen, or whatever. And so you begin to think that the church misled you, and you join a group. Or the Mormons kind of bring you in by social means. They don't really get you theologically. They socialize you into
the cult.
Yeah, they do. They're nice people. They invite you to their stuff. They rarely actually talk about theology. They just talk about how great it's going to be in heaven together. And wouldn't you like the latest information, the newest testament that Jesus gave? And so it's kind of a socialization process. So let's say you're someone who's left the group, and what do you do now? You're sort of at wit's end. You're beating yourself up maybe, or you don't really even want to believe anything else anymore because you were deceived, or you just don't know what to do. What's step one?
Well, we dealt with the worst of the worst, but having said that, the program that we developed, I believe, works with individuals who don't need to go into a facility. They can, if they've got the right counseling, it'll work. And we would always start with what we call the 10 recovery rules. And the first one was that there was nothing wrong with them, something was done to them. So you can begin to separate the individual from what happened. Most people that come out of these groups have experienced some form of what would be called trauma. And trauma causes two things. It robs you of your ability to trust. So you find it difficult to trust God. You find it difficult because look what happened when I tried to trust God. It disconnects you from others. You don't trust others because they've been deceptive. And you don't trust your own self to know how to trust because look what happened when I tried to do this. The other thing that trauma does is it robs you of the sense of control. So the individual that gets out of these groups feels like their life is out of control. They can't get it together. Mm-hmm. So we would start with helping them to begin to understand that something was done to you. And the symptoms you're experiencing are the same as anyone would experience if they'd been in your shoes and gone through this, for whatever the reason was. Then we would tell them that you can't change what you don't understand. So we would work to give them a framework that would begin to make sense out of what they had experienced, because part of the difficulty is, I don't know how to sort this out. And one thing you were referencing, Ron, was when an individual comes out of a group, at least this is what I was thinking, here you are, you're a believer, you've got all these beliefs, some of it was really good, but some of it you really struggle with. And how do I sort that out?
Right.
How do I sort out what was good and what was bad? And because I don't trust my own ability to be able to do this.
And you know, one thing I'd like to, in my group, we were told that everything we'd been taught prior to joining the group was wrong. Mm-hmm. It didn't even bother to. And now that was a totally self-contradictory. I mean, when you looked at how much the leader was basically regurgitating theology that we'd heard outside the group, mm-hmm. you know, because he had to sound evangelical just to keep us there, to get us there and to keep us there.
Right.
But then they turn around and say this is, you know, the internal contradiction aspect, you know, of these groups. But the basic idea wasn't literally, you know, now looking back, I realize they're not literally telling me to forget everything I learned. Although they're definitely telling me to question everything I learned.
Yes.
And they're definitely telling me to question my own understanding of everything I learned. And basically to just trust totally in them. You know, just they are now the total interpreters. They will sort everything out for me. And so you were talking about how you're trying to tell where you going. I don't want to presume where you were going. How do you sort out once I leave this group? How do I sort out what was good for what was bad? I'm almost tempted to say, you know, why don't you just go to a trusted teacher that you had before you joined this group, you know, and not and find out how much of what they were saying was consistent with those people you know.
What you were just saying that the group is extremist, the group is exclusive. You've got to forget everything that you learned because it was all wrong. So you leave the group now at this point, and because you know intellectually that I can't stay here, there's something that's wrong, but you still have all of that underlying belief system that's running around inside of you. So you're like a man without a country. You can't go back to the group because you know that it's bad, but you also can't get involved in a church or with a trusted teacher because you've been inoculated to a certain extent to not trust these individuals. So it creates a real difficult situation for the survivor. And if the group is really extreme, it's more extreme that the cult survivor, that they're going to be traumatized, they're going to have all kind of spiritual issues. When we dealt with this at Meadow Haven, the spiritual dimension was always the last thing that we dealt with, or usually towards the end. We would have some people that would come to Meadow Haven, and they'd say to us, if you're going to talk to me about the Bible, I'm out of here. And we say, fine, we won't talk to you about the Bible. And we would talk to them about all the principles that are in the Bible that deal with psychology to help them heal. And then eventually they would say to us, you know, I've never met people like you before. And they would begin to ask questions. So they needed to see grace demonstrated. But then we had other individuals who'd come out of a Bible-based group. They'd get here to Meadow Haven. They'd say, I want to sit down and study the book of Galatians. We'd say, fine. So we would take them wherever they were at. But it's a timing issue, and it's one where we would tell the survivors, the most difficult thing you're going to have to do, aside from anything else, is to sort through what was healthy and what was not healthy for you. We can't tell you that. You've got to decide this on your own, because this is your journey. That we can be helpful, but you've got to make these kind of decisions. And that's hard because, as you know, the tendency or the desire when you first leave is, I just want to forget all of this. I just want to move on, get rid of it. It's an end of a chapter.
Well, actually, I wish I could have done that. I think some of the people who did leave the group did do that.
Yeah, to try to.
Yeah, I don't know. I get the impression from talking to them. People, one of the things that was very difficult for me to deal with was that some of the people, when I left my group, some of the people were willing to talk to me. Some of the people, I was poison, even though they'd left. In some cases, they'd been kicked out.
Yes.
But I was poison.
Yes.
Even though they were not welcome anymore, I wasn't welcome in their lives. And some of them made it very clear, I don't want to talk to you anymore.
Right.
Because I was looking for support. I was looking for spiritual, emotional, psychological support, trying to make sense of what happened to me. And I figured maybe these people could help me. They had no desire whatsoever. Yeah. Yep. And the way they put it to me made me think I was the problem somehow.
Very, very. We hear that all the time. All the time.
So my wife believes it's because of what was said about me after I left. And she heard some of it because she didn't leave right away. She stayed for a little bit and heard some pretty nasty things about me, I'm told.
Well, the person that left before you too might think, well, I don't know if he's going to repeat what I'm saying to him back to the leader. It's almost like you leave the group and again, you've got this cognitive dissonance. You know that you can't go back, you can't follow it. But at the same time, it's almost like, well, I got to be careful what I say, what I do, what I think. I certainly can't come out against the group because if I do that, it's going to create some huge issues potentially for me, and maybe God is going to get me in some way or another. Mm-hmm. So former members, we hear this very frequently. And if you were one who was responsible, or if the individual that let's say you were the first one out, and this person comes to you, but they've been an abuser of yours, then you still, even though you're glad maybe that they're out, I don't want to talk to you. You made my life hell in the group. Right.
Yeah. You mentioned Galatians, and I understand that was almost standard curriculum at Wellspring. Maybe it still is. Yes. Paul Martin and Larry Pyle and those guys had lessons prepared in Galatians. And what I really like about that book is, as you're reading it, you get the impression that these Judaizers, it wasn't just what they were saying. There was something else going on there.
Yes.
They were able to manipulate Paul and Barnabas.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, Peter and Barnabas.
Yes. Right.
They were able to, they had sway. They had, and when you read 2 Corinthians, especially, that you see, they may have even been the same group, the same kind of people at least.
Yes.
Who had wormed their way into Corinth.
Yes.
And were using all kinds of tactics to run Paul down. And in other words, they weren't even attacking him straight on with what he was teaching.
Right.
His style, his
character. They went after his character.
They went after his character. His physical presence is unimpressive. Yep. And he's really big on these letters, but boy, when you see him, you realize he's not such a hot shot.
And maybe he needs money, and he's kind of into this because he's trying to make a living.
And also, why does 2 Corinthians begin and end with these passages on suffering? Mm-hmm. Well, these guys were the original prosperity gospel guys. They were saying, how can God be look at what God has let this guy go through. How can he be in favor of him? Obviously he's on God's bad side. Look at all he suffered. God's trying to
kind of stuff.
Right. And Paul talks to them sort of tongue in cheek as being super apostles.
Right.
Yes.
And they misuse the Bible. Now, Ron, I think we have a sponsor on this kind of an issue, right?
Yeah, well, because you just never know everybody needs to try it every once in a while. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word. Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take this whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, truth claim-free. All of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. Our regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, not your father's worship experience. You need to check it out. And I think we were served many meals from the Bible Buffet in my group. Sometimes they were meals that were designed to make us feel good for being in the group. Other times though, they were pretty nasty. So,
well, just the two things that, or just the issues that you two gentlemen were bringing up in regards to the behavior of the Galatians. This is what I think is so critical that the church needs to teach. It's not just theology. It's not just having your theology straight. These examples are in the scripture there for our benefit. And so you look at the behavior of what was going on. And I think, Ron, you hit on a big thing with the manipulation, the power that these Judaizers had in Galatia by being a better way, more holy, individuals who are really serving God properly. And so we've got to do these things here. That is persuasive to many individuals, but that also needs to be taught. It's not just, are they denying the divinity of Christ or the resurrection?
Now, 25 years ago next year will be the 25th anniversary of a book that came out that really exposed a rift in the evangelical countercult community, apologetics community. It was called Recovering from Churches That Abuse.
Yes.
And the reason it exposed this rift was because of this whole issue we're talking about. Mind control, yes. Should we call it that? Should we call it, coercive persuasion was another term. Should we call it?
Thought reform.
And one particular group that I won't mention here, but someday I will, was being accused of these things. And when you look at the accusations, they really weren't that extreme. They were. It was really a low level of spiritual abuse that they were being accused of. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something like, let's send the authorities in to break this group up. It was here were good intentions that went bad. And, yes. And the author, that's how he started out, that these people had good intentions. Mm-hmm. But before the book even got into print, this group was not only, trying to, get their own story out there first, which they did, but they were questioning the very idea of spiritual abuse, the very idea of coercive persuasion, manipulation, or anything like that. If you left, they hired a cult apologist mm-hmm. named Anson Shoup to write for them.
Oh yes.
This guy's shtick is basically you don't listen to disgruntled ex-members. You just don't. Well, why not? Why is the story of the group okay, but the story of the ex-members off limits? Why can't we listen to them? It turns out this guy, I think, wasn't he brought on as a witness for the Moonies in some cases?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Yeah,
along with J. Gordon Melton. So anyways, Robinson. The wounds are 25 years old from this. They're still there though, and some people actually got involved in this that I don't think should have. And then a little while later, well, it wasn't a little while, it was years later, we had even a bigger rift opening up where we had people defending a cult against a Christian ministry that was being sued by the cult.
Yeah.
So there's confusion.
Guys, we're kind of at the end of our time here, and we usually run over a minute or two, just because we can. But
Yeah.
but what I'd like to propose here is we've had kind of a good start on this topic, I think, but it's going to require more.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask a couple things. Would you consider coming back in the fairly near future, maybe in a month or so?
Sure.
What I'm going to do then is I'm also going to invite people to send questions in to us that we can focus on the questions they have.
Good.
Okay. Does that sound like a
great
plan?
idea, Don?
Okay. Because there are people who really, I have every week emails or phone calls on this one topic, and I always recommend getting the subtle power of spiritual abuse as a starting point. And there's a book that each of you have a book that you like to recommend as well, which is what?
Mine is the 12 Christian beliefs that can drive you crazy.
Okay.
And there are assumptions that are made about Christianity or what it means to follow God that are just not right.
Okay, 12 Christian beliefs that drive you crazy. And Ron, you have...
Well, I like churches that abuse because, if for no other reason, that you can get it free online.
That's a good reason.
Yeah, Dr. Ronald Enroth has authorized, he authorized the uploading of this in PDF format. You can download it, you can read it.
Being a almost supported missionary, and funds are always tight, if it's free, it's for me.
Yeah, right. And I think it'll go down as a classic. It was the first book I read on the topic when I was still in my group. And that's the whole story in itself.
Oh, that's unusual.
Yeah, it is, and it had just come out. It was hot off the presses. Mm-hmm. And
Bob, anyways, I am going to contact you. We'll set something up for maybe a month from now. In fact,
sounds good.
Several have said yes. Please come back. And so this is, like I said, I get a phone call, email, literally from around the world these days saying, what do I do next?
Right.
And it could be someone who's left the group and they're trying to sort it out, or someone who has family members in a group and they're saying, yes, how do I reach back to them? What do I do now? What's my next step?
Exactly.
So we'll do that. Ron, well, first, Bob, thank you again for being on.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for the privilege of being here, gentlemen.
And when is that conference? October what?
It's October 26th and 27th.
Okay, and where would they go get information?
It's in
where
Hartford.
Where would they get information?
You can go to the spiritual abuse. If you Google that, spiritual abuse, the spiritual abuse resources, there'll be a link there that will take you to the conference.
Okay, perfect.
And maybe we can give it to you to post.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Okay. We'll definitely do that. Yeah. Okay. Ron, you want to walk us out of here?
Okay, giving credit to where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polygumus. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, who are totally responsible for its content, although neither you nor anyone else will ever be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never.
It will never happen. And I'm trying to figure out how to hit the stop button here.
How to get the stop button?
My mouse keeps on.
Oh, there you are.
My mouse keeps on doing this thing where I can't control it, but then I move it to the other screen and bring it back, and then I'll have to do that from now on.
And then it's controllable again. See, it's in its own cult. It just does whatever it wants.
Who writes up all of those credits?
Oh, we stole them. I stole them from other sources. Some of them I've known Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe for a long time.
All right. All right, and with that, we're going to say adios to all that are watching.